Hi, and welcome back to our podcast, The Leader's Legacy, through Archangel Professional Leadership. My name is Mike Davis, and I'm the founder of APLGuardian.com. That's Archangel Professional Leadership. We'd like to welcome you to our podcast and webcast today. We have a special guest. Her name is Christina Guerra, otherwise known as Tina Guerra. She's a personal friend of mine. She's a retired police commander for the state police in Texas. She is an author. She is an influencer and a mentor to first responders and to survivors of trauma. So grateful that she's able to spend a little bit of time with us, and I can't wait for us to hear what she has to say. Let's welcome Tina Guerra. Hi, Tina. It's great to have you on our show. I'm so excited about having you on our podcast and webcast today. So welcome.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for the invitation, Mike.
I'm so happy to have you on today. I want you to tell our guests a little bit about yourself. And I come to realize today, as I was getting ready to do this podcast, that we met in 2001. It's been a long time.
Let's not count those years.
Yeah.
Let's not count back.
Tell our guests a little bit about yourself, Tina.
Well, my original background was in business and banking, but I was recruited to apply for a position with the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission in the enforcement division. And that was the bulk of my career. Spent 30 years there. Come to find that the business and banking background really helped me a lot because I dealt a lot with business people. So that background really gave me a good balance in working with people.
And so, yeah, that's where we met when you were working as a public servant. And you have had such a powerful impact on my life, personally and professionally as a mentor. So it was just, you're such a natural fit as an influencer and as a public servant and community mentor that I was excited to have you on our show today. So what I do want to ask you is very similar questions to the other guardians that we've had on our show. You know, as you were growing up, or as you were developing your professional career, you know, who influenced your life? Was there a particular mentor, someone that really stood out in your life that kind of helped you pave the way in where you're at now and professionally and personally?
I think I have to say it was my father. He died very young. I was a senior in high school, just graduated when he died of a massive heart attack. He was in his late 40s. Which I thought was very old at the time, held my breath in my 40s. But he had a very, very strong work ethic, had a strong belief in education being the great equalizer. Being a Hispanic in South Texas, working for the the major telecom corporation, it was challenging for him. And I can remember bits and pieces of his life. He worked real hard at not, I guess the word is not being bitter or angry about some of the things that would happen to him that in the workplace. And mind you, he was the only one with a college degree in one team he worked in, and yet he was made to come in an hour early and wash the service trucks. And so those kind of things influenced him. But in a positive way. So he didn't pass on any type of commiserating or bitterness about it, but actually flipped it and worked hard at influencing us with a strong work ethic and education. Never telling us what he wanted us to be or to do, but to have a strong work ethic and get an education. So those two things had a huge influence on me.
That's wonderful. And Tina, you know, as you became a public servant, you know, that's kind of where your career path took you. You rose through the ranks. And actually, when I met you, you were, I believe, already a lieutenant with the state police, you know, and you took that journey. And I know you have taught also at the police academy. But, you know, when you first became a supervisor, did you feel like you were adequately prepared for that role, the role you were about to take on, or did you have a desire to be a supervisor?
I did, because when I left the banking industry, I was a supervisor already at the loan department, actually, and I was only in my 20s. So I had a taste for it. I enjoyed it because I liked helping people. I had a very strong parochial school education where the women religious had an influence on public service. And in fact, me and my 4 siblings were all in public service industries. So that had a huge thing. But no, I think management across the board has some very strong threads that go through that you can use them regardless of the industry. But you kind of had to wing it. It was kind of like on-the-job training. It was overwhelming at times because there was a lot of people that you impacted in those decisions and that you had to make sometimes, and that weighed heavy on me.
And that's very similar to what some of our other guests have said. And let me ask you this, for those people in public service or in any field right now that are considering taking on that role as a supervisor, what might you be able to say to them for them to be a little bit better prepared than some of us were when we got thrown in the deep end of the pool?
Listen more, talk less. Listen more, talk less.
That's great advice.
Find a balance, because most of the time I found, and this was very true, in those type of positions, it wasn't the work itself, it wasn't the public, it was the employees. And it probably was about, I would estimate 75 to 80% of my management time had to do with employees. And I would have hoped that I would have known them better so that I could have been better equipped at dealing with them. So if you don't know them, it's hard, because sometimes if you're not trained and if it doesn't come to you naturally, you can take things really personal, and that can skew and take you down a path, and then you get labeled. So that was a challenging piece in the learning curve.
That's great advice. You mentioned training and you mentioned communications. I mean, you really think that those are probably some of the most vital skills that new supervisors, especially coming in, might need to develop or work on?
Absolutely. And I forgot the percentages, but I remembered looking at some data that said that we emphasized training in areas that we spent less time on, and more time on things we didn't use as often, and less time on the things that we use the most. And that hasn't really improved from what I've looked, as far as the data, looking at the curricula and what goes on in the basic training academy. But definitely, I think communication is probably at the top. If you can't express yourself, if you can't make it clear the expectations and then the outcomes, and know how to balance that with the needs of your employees, because they're people. They have their own demands on their time. It's just going to turn into chaos.
And I got to compliment you here too, because communication was a big thing that, many of the initiatives that you led as a public servant, even now, as a mentor and an influencer. You were a public information officer when we met. And so there were a lot of community initiatives that we were a part of on some of the projects that you and I worked on together, and many more that you're a part of now. What do you feel as far as some of those big initiatives? What was kind of one of the biggest accomplishments that you had, either as a supervisor or as a public servant in your career?
Understood very clearly that most of the complaints against the agents I supervised had a lot to do with people not understanding who we were, what our role was, what our objectives were. And being in a major metropolitan area with 1 million plus people, how do you get that message? So I chose to utilize the media, which in law enforcement is often looked at as the adversary. And I found that if I could be honest and reach out to them first, I had them identify that and push it out to the community. So depending on how you viewed it, some people thought I loved the media and loved being on TV. But if you really knew me, you knew I hated it, but used it as an opportunity to balance that and neutralize anything that would come at us negatively. So I think for me, the greatest accomplishment was not having any major scandals or drama play out in the media and get drawn out and skewed. And that's because people, for the most part, in the media over time began to understand who we are, who we were, and what we did, which made my job so much easier as far as the community was concerned.
Let's transition over to the next generation, the people that are going to fill our shoes and do amazing things for the community. So if you had an opportunity today to talk to, the next generation of young people, 10,000 kids, 100,000 kids, college students, whatnot, what do you want to leave them with? What do you want to tell them about being in public service in any role, whether it's police, fire, EMS, or in the military, or as a government employee? What do you think are some of the most rewarding things that may impact them in the coming generation?
I think that they are going to be challenged going into this next era, just by virtue of the issues that we're seeing and technology that is enhancing it or exacerbating it, depending on how you view it. History repeats itself, and all these past few years, I get triggers from the 80s, the 70s and 80s, when police brutality was, it was on every major headline because we didn't have the internet the way we do today. And we learned a lot because it's not as bad as what I saw back then, but it's still really bad. And it's very challenging for people going into a new position, wanting to make an impact and being accepted by peers. So that pressure to assimilate and resist because it doesn't feel right or look right is the biggest challenge for them. So all I can tell them and suggest to them is you've got to follow your own intuition. And if it doesn't feel right, you need to do something. You need to speak up. You need to have an active role in changing it for the better, and not sitting back and allowing same old. And I found there were two types of officers: the ones that wanted to pass on old habits that were bitter or had other stuff going on in their lives, and others that wanted to continue to change and progress. So find those. They're often labeled sometimes because they go against the grain, but that may be where the change is best found.
So finding those mentors who essentially, promote moral courage. That's really what it is all about, isn't it?
Oh, so, absolutely.
You mentioned earlier, being courageous and wellness is very impactful in everyone's personal and professional life. But we say personal and professional life, especially in a public safety career. Tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit about some of the challenges that you've faced in your personal life and how you have influenced wellness in others and what you're working on now.
I found that I discovered the word courage, actually, in the etymology of the word, is a derivative of a Latin and French cor, which is the heart. So the understanding of that word has evolved over time, and it's not what it was intended to be. What the real meaning of that word means is you're acting from your heart, which is synonymous, or the analogy for your core values, who you are, your moral compass. And it's not having to do with bravery. It has to do with who you are, and that comes spontaneously. You don't have to think about it. So that type of courage, that moral compass, can guide you in so many directions. And I found for myself that understanding that and conveying that and encouraging it in others in various forms. And I wear so many hats. I'm a grandmother. I have 2 grandkids, and I don't want them growing up without having a broad view of the whole world and not just a little bubble with one narrow view, so that they can understand others. I think if we spend more time listening than talking, we understand. We may not agree, but we can at least understand, and that's the first step. in anything. I still teach a little bit part-time. I work with a spiritual aspect. I went through some training after I retired, and I'm a spiritual director and a part-time hospice chaplain. So one of the greatest things that I encourage others is to find balance in your life. That if you are living, eating, and sleeping a first responder job 24/7, it will not bode well. Not professionally, not personally, and not physically. That over time, that will eat at you. You need to find a hobby to stay connected with others. Because if you surround yourself only with the same type of people that only think like you do, you don't learn, you don't grow. And then that lends to the unrest and the us versus them. And we're all human. There are good cops and bad cops, just like there are good people and bad people. And it isn't even so much that they're good or bad, but that their decisions and their actions can be labeled that way. And that can be in any setting, not just law enforcement. And we cannot blindly support someone just because of what they do. We have to take stands and police ourselves. One of the greatest mentors I had, I'll never forget this, and it was true then and it's true now. He told me in the 80s. He was the leader in McAllen when the police brutality, the first televised, recorded event of police brutality in the history of law enforcement occurred in McAllen. And he survived that. A federal judge got involved. It was horrendous. And he said, if we do not police ourselves, we will be policed and it will be ugly. And I never forgot that. And I think that's the importance of many things, not just in law enforcement, but even more so now.
And so, it's not just a matter of earning trust and expecting that once it's earned, it's 100% fulfilled from there forward. It's maintaining that level of trust, right? I mean, that's the goal in every contact, every opportunity. And we're going to make mistakes. We're going to see mistakes happen. But, again, mending is an evolving thing, right? So that continued trust is a constant, when they take the uniform off and when they leave it on, the way they live. And that's what I hear you saying. And I really appreciate all that you've been doing. Outside of that, you're an author of the book, Don't Bother Me, I'm Dying, A Journey Through Sorrow and Joy with Hope. And I know you mentioned hospice care. It's a very personal story. And so we want to let our viewers and our listeners know that is available on Amazon, correct?
Yes, it is.
It is a powerful book. It's an amazing read that I know you've been there for my family and myself. I'm always here for you as well. So I definitely want to plug the book. It's needed for many, and it's very personal. So I appreciate you sharing that with the world. Outside of that, Tina, I'd like to ask you, what do you want your legacy to be? I mean, you've already done so many amazing things. What do you want people to say about Tina Guerra?
I would just like people to remember me as being authentic and doing the right thing. That to me sums it all up. And certainly I made my own mistakes in my lifetime, but that's just being part of humanity. There's no perfect person out there, but being authentic, what you see is what you get, and that I strive to do the right thing.
I so much appreciate you being on our podcast today. It's been an amazing conversation. I look forward to meeting with you here soon. I know we're in a pandemic. We'll get some coffee. It looks like we're headed on a real good journey right now of healing. I know there's so many people out there that are struggling with challenges, so we pray for them. I'm so thankful for having you on. I appreciate you. And, the mantra of what we do is the word serviam, and that is the cry of St. Michael, who stood up and stood with God, as the devil said, and to serviam. So that is the word that we use here, serviam, meaning I will serve. And you have, and we appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you for having me on.
Thanks again to our guest, Tina Guerra. We appreciate having her on our show. And if you're interested in getting the book that she referenced, Don't Bother Me, I'm Dying, A Journey Through Sorrow and Joy with Hope, be sure and check it out on Amazon.com, where you can order her book. Again, my name is Mike Davis, and I want to welcome you back to aplguardian.com website so you can check out our shop, download some of our other podcasts, and check out some of the web episodes with so many of our guardians. We do also offer consulting for public safety organizations in the form of property room inventories, best practices, and policy guidelines. And we do have training opportunities with many of the guardians that you've seen on our podcast. So make sure you visit our website at aplguardian.com. You can also reach out directly to me at mike@archangelleadership.com, and visit us next time as we continue to bring some of the most influential and professional mentors in public safety direct to you through our podcast. Visit us wherever you download your favorite podcast. Just search Archangel Professional Leadership. We look forward to seeing you again on our next episode of the Leader's Legacy podcast. Thank you, and Serviam.